Let's cut through any BS and get immediately to talking. Let's talk Dennis Allen. The Saints have now played 16 games. They've gone 7-9 for the last 30-ish years. 16 games has been enough time to talk about whether or not a coach is good, whether or not a team is good, what their issues are, what needs to come next, etc. So I don't feel any need to wait for one more game, especially considering they're already eliminated from any potential for the playoffs. And thus, next week, other than deciding how good of a draft pick Philadelphia is going to get, doesn't really matter very much. But I don't want to talk about the roster or what comes next or what they need to focus on or any of that today. Of course, because for the first time in his career, Dennis Allen not only won 2 games in a row last week, but has now won 3 games in a row. There's a conversation around it. So let's just have an honest conversation about Dennis Allen, the head coach. The team entered the season with many people, not just a few, not just local fans, many people predicting that they could be fringe contenders for the Super Bowl. This was based on the talent of the roster, the level of veteran experience, and the idea that they went 9-8 last year. And we're going to come back to this. They went 9-8 last year with not only no starting quarterback for more than half of the season, but having to play Ian Book for a game, Trevor Siemian I think for 5 games, 6 games, and having that level of player on top of all the injuries they had, the worst receiving core in the league by miles and miles, and a very good but not great, again, great is reserved for great defense last year, people went, okay, if Jameis can just be the version of himself he was for the first half of last year, plus these better receivers, and you have relatively the same defense, you obviously lost Sean Payton, but if Dennis Allen isn't bad at his job, like this team should be in a position to contend. Well, here's the problem. And by the way, everything I'm about to say went through Dennis Allen. This is all part of the conversation. They traded out a young safety with incredible range, fantastic ball skills, who's really smart, who was one of the core components of their defense in Marcus Williams. Marcus Williams and Marshawn Lattimore was the identity of the Saints defense the last several years. Marshawn's ability to erase or mostly erase most teams' best wide receiver, and Marcus's ability to eliminate deep plays allowed them to do a lot of things creatively defensively and allowed them to be towards the upper part of the league in sacks, even though they didn't have, really outside of Cam Jordan, anyone with any level of reliability to get sacks. And Cam, while he's still a very good player, is not close to the great player he was a few years ago, and he needs more time to get to the quarterback, which means you need better coverage. Well, they traded that player out for a mostly washed Honey Badger, who's never been an elite free safety. He's been an opportunistic one. He's been elite in a playmaking role. He's really the ideal position for him would have been next to Marcus Williams and next to C.D. Deuce, who we'll get to in a second, in the Malcolm Jenkins role. He would have thrived in that role. Well, speaking of Malcolm Jenkins, he retired. So to replace him, and you can argue that they replaced him with Honey Badger and they replaced Marcus Williams with Marcus May. I don't really care which one you think they replaced who with. The reality is Marcus May is a worse player than Jenkins was, and a much, much, much worse player than Marcus Williams, and Honey Badger is a worse player than Marcus Williams. And so you got worse at the safety position by a lot, but also you didn't just get worse there by quality of player, you got worse there by quality of talent, type of talent, and skill set. So you had a defensive unit that was built around one thing, and you shifted it to take away that one thing. And you wonder why this defense got its teeth kicked in every time they went against a halfway competent offense through most of the year. If you look back, that's kind of what happened. Even some not very competent offenses had their way with this defense pretty consistently. Obviously, injuries are a part of that, but they're not everything. You don't have a pass rush, much to speak of. Your safeties are slow. Marshon Lattimore missed a lot of time. You had issues. That was expected. Now, on top of those two moves, trading out good players. Now, obviously, one of those guys retired, but trading out good players for worse versions. And Marcus Williams-Clay is really a great player for a worse version. You then trade one of the best slot corners and one of the most versatile, let's call it just front 15 yards. So front 7, whatever. Players that play within the first 15 yards from the line of scrimmage. One of the single most impactful players in the league in that spot was Chauncey Gardner-Johnson the last several years, and was this year until he got hurt. That's not a surprise. He's been an impactful player emotionally. He's been an impactful player on the field. He's been making impactful plays. Even if you want to bring up the missed tackles, if you actually go back and watch, a meaningful chunk of those tackles was him getting to plays that he probably shouldn't have been able to get to, but because he has impressive quickness and impressive instincts, and a lot of those plays resulted in guys being tackled shortly after him. That has value. That has a ton of value. You know why he got traded? Chauncey Gardner-Johnson got traded for a bag of chips, 5th-round pick, because he was mouthing off, reportedly, to members of the Saints front office during practice, probably after making a play, while in negotiations with the team. Now, if you were at your job and had massively overperformed relative to your salary, the way he had, to the tune of millions of dollars. Folks, that's 7 figures. Most of us would mouth off to our boss 4 or 5 figures in difference relative to performance. 7 figures. He mouthed off a little bit. He didn't. And again, if you disagree with this, please provide corroborated reporting otherwise, or shut the fuck up. He did not go to the coaches on the sideline and say, "I'm gonna fuck your mother," or some stupidity like that. If he had gone that far, yeah, he's probably going to get traded because you're becoming a cancer in the locker room. That would have got reported by now. He mouthed off. He got chirpy. This is the guy that got his own teammates so mad that he punched him, and got multiple other players so mad they punched him, and got Tom Brady so mad that he broke a tablet, and then got Microsoft Surface to tweet about it. It is a known commodity. Here's what it really was. It was a power move. This is my team now. You're going to respect me, you're going to do what I say, or you're going to be out of here. They went, hey, we're probably not going to pay this guy what he wants anyway, so we'll trade him for something over nothing. We trust our depth in the position, and it's an opportunity for the head coach to establish himself as an authority figure in the locker room. Well, it turns out none of those things worked out that way. Bad decision-making, bad coaching, bad analysis by Dennis Allen, and through Dennis Allen by the Saints staff. So that's just the preseason. Now let's look at the regular season. Jameis Winston does a miracle comeback against Atlanta, which required a whole lot of falconing to happen in the first place in week 1. The Saints should have lost that game. If they were playing any team other than the Falcons, they would have lost that game. They didn't lose that game, so we remember it fondly, but they should have lost that game. Jameis Winston hurts his back towards the end of that game. Jameis Winston then starts the next week. Shouldn't have started. Absolutely should not have started. You have to treat back injuries seriously. If you're in a leadership position, one of your primary responsibilities is to put those under you in positions for success and to protect them against their own worst impulses. Period. Also, as a head coach, your responsibility is to put your team in the best position to win. When you start a player who has an injury that will have a ripple effect across literally their entire body and reduce their ability to function physically to almost nothing, the fucking player shouldn't play. What's more, not only did he play him that week, He played him the next week. Now you've not only damaged the player, you've probably ruined the player. Beyond just ruining the player, you've lost 2 games that you have no business losing. That's not the only issue. Throughout the entire first half of the season, the Saints were embarrassingly undisciplined. Stupid penalty after stupid penalty, unable to address or fix issues that should be routine problems for an organization that has top-down structure, that has established leadership at the top, established protocols. Everybody knows what the expectations are, what they should be doing. Why am I bringing this up? Because that was clear under Sean Payton. And if you don't believe that, even current Saints players, Mark Ingram and Cameron Jordan, on their little podcast, I say little, my viewership, their viewership, you get the idea. But in their podcast, their little side hustle, they even basically pointed out that some of the stuff that was happening under Sean, like heads would be rolling. And they're like, but DA's cool, man. He's cool. They don't respect you, dude. They know you're not on top of things. They know you're not in charge the way that it was intimated that you were. It's obvious. Undisciplined team, unorganized team. Now you go to a game planning aspect multiple times throughout the year. Having no idea about what matchups are favorable to them versus not. Having no concept of, having to multiple times come out and say, oh yeah, well, we're working on it. We got to figure out a way to get AK the ball in space. Really? The best player on your offense, you can't find a way to get him in space? You can't throw a couple of screens and run a couple of routes? You don't understand that there is value in getting the ball into your best player's hands a few times a game, partially from a rhythm standpoint, partially from a forcing attention to the defense standpoint, partially as a tell, so that you can then use tendency breakers later on. Like there's a lot of aspects that go into how football works and how strategy works in those moves. They never figured it out. He still hasn't figured it out. 16 weeks in, still hasn't figured that out. Hasn't figured out how to maximize any of the players on the team. Has done a good job coaching the defense. The defense has turned around. The last several weeks, they're allowing like less than 15 points a game. And we'll get into that in a second. Well, great. That's a defensive coordinator. There's more than that on the head coach. And it's impossibly frustrating from an analysis perspective to look at all that we're talking about here and then look at the last 3 weeks and say, oh, well, the Saints are turning it around. Look at DA's record. He's 7-9. If he goes 8-9, that's 1 game worse than last year. Okay. Now let's talk about this. Let's talk about how goddamn stupid of a position that is. And it is. It is a moronic position. So 1 game last year, they lost because of a hurricane. Period. You look at that Panthers game, they lost that game because of the hurricane. They lost another game because of COVID. And arguably lost 2. At minimum, the Saints could have easily have been an 11-win team last year if they just don't have the Ian Book game against the Dolphins and the game immediately following the hurricane. I think it's Hurricane Ian. Sorry, I forget the names. It's absurd. That's 2 more wins. That's a playoff team immediately. With Trevor Siemian starting a major chunk of their season. The gap between Trevor Siemian and Andy Dalton and what he's done this year, because he's been fine. He's been perfectly acceptable, middle-of-the-road quarterback play. And every now and then he makes a really good play, and every now and then he does something really dumb. He had several of those today. But that's the reality. That's where they are. They won, at best, 1 less game than a team without extraordinary circumstances would have won 3 more games with a far worse roster. Yes, far worse. Far worse receiving core. Far worse. And far worse play at quarterback. Those are incontestable positions. I'm sorry. Last year, Sean Payton wins 11 or 12 games with this year's roster. Easily. Especially looking at the schedule and the way the season is played out. That's just the reality of what you're looking at. So don't bring up the record because it's a stupid conversation if you're comparing last year to this year, looking just at the raw record and not talking about context. You're not telling me that you're smart or you're good at numbers. You're telling me that you're a fucking idiot. That's it. That's all that you're telling people if you make that statement. Oh, they won one less game. Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah, he's doing a good job. He's turning things around. You're an idiot. Does that mean DA can't turn things around? It's not a zero chance. They still have a lot of issues with being aggressive. They still struggle with situational football. They still make poor personnel decisions in game and out. They, the fact that why is Pete Carmichael still the OC? Is there nobody on the roster who can run an offense better than him? I don't know. Doug Marrone has a history of doing it better than him. There were moves that could have been made throughout the season that would have said, hey, this is a head coach who's in charge, who understands the problems and is making decisions. Does it guarantee that those decisions would have got a better result? No. But the process of making those decisions would have at least shown you have an individual who takes ownership of the process, his job, and is willing to make the correct procedural steps to try to address the problems. And if that step doesn't work and doesn't fully address the problem, then I'll do it again until it fixes it. That's called leadership, folks. That's called taking ownership. DA doesn't do that. DA has repeatedly pointed at the offense when they've had problems. Oh, that's the offense. The offense needs to figure that out. No, dum-dum. You're the head coach. You have someone who the players seem to like. They liked him as a defensive coordinator. And don't forget, most of these players were Sean's players for the last decade. Most of these players damn near made a Super Bowl under Sean Payton. Most of these players have a crap ton of pride and a crap ton of discipline. They like Dennis Allen. They know Dennis Allen. No, they didn't quit on Dennis Allen. That's not the amazing feather in his cap that some people seem to think that it is. They didn't quit on him, partially because they're vets with a lot of pride, and partially because they genuinely do like the guy. That doesn't mean he put them in a position to succeed. It's not just their record, although the record relative to the roster talent is embarrassing. The record relative to how the games that were actually played this year ended, being up 16-3 and losing that game, being a great example, those things all matter. But now let's talk about next year. Because the reality is Dennis Allen has not been a good coach this year. The reality is him winning the last 3 weeks is not a sign that he's turned his season around. Beating the Browns in a blizzard with a banged-up roster and no receivers on a quarterback who hasn't played in 2 years, playing his first few weeks after coming off from being a grotesque, horrible human being, and hasn't been good since coming back, is not some incredible feather in his cap. A game that they barely won and tried to lose multiple times. Beating the Philadelphia Eagles with Gardner Minshew at quarterback, who threw a pick six, which is the biggest reason you won, with their star left tackle, I think he's his left tackle. No, he's his right tackle. Their star tackle out, which allowed their pass rush to have a lot more success. Like, is it a good win? Absolutely. All wins are good wins. But all wins aren't indicative of incredible process. Did they play a better game against Philly? Yeah. Did they play above their level? Yeah. Did Philly play below their level? Yeah. All of those are yes. Is that one game, that instant reaction, that Dennis Allen is suddenly so much better at his job than he was before? No, not if you watch the game. Just frankly, no. Lots of missed opportunities, plenty of mistakes, plenty of procedural errors. Yeah. Very, 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 very little adjustments. But they won. Great. Good for them. Does that mean that he's the reason they're doing better? Yes and no. It means he's not the worst coach in the league. That was Nathaniel Hackett. Is he a good coach? We have seen no indication of that yet. Not as a head coach. Because as a head coach, it's about those little things. It's about forcing those adjustments, making those game plans, making those personnel decisions. It's about taking that ownership. It's about making sure that everybody gets put in a potential position to succeed. He has done none of those. Now, could he do them next year? If you took DA's defense, you gave him a couple more players, gave him a better defensive tackle, if Granderson continues to evolve, if Peyton Turner somehow turns into something, if they get smart and they start Alontae Taylor opposite of Marshawn Lattimore instead of Adebo, if they find a slot corner, if they find a young safety that they can bring in to play better than the dum-dums they have back there, Let's say all those ifs, and they have a great defense under Dennis Allen. He's shown the ability. If you give him enough talent, he can put out a pretty damn good defense. Okay, well, go sign an offensive coordinator, and you get a new offensive coordinator. And you get someone who can own the offense, who just tells DA, stick over there, do your thing, I got this. And they perform. Could the Saints be a better team? Absolutely. But if you get an offensive coordinator that can do that and can take control of an entire side of the ball and can tell your head coach that, yeah, F off, go over there, go do your thing, I got this. Sounds like you have someone with more qualities that might indicate the ability to be a head coach than the guy who's currently a head coach has ever shown. So you're probably going to have some issues going down the line there. That was one of the issues that Sean and Greg had. Greg thought that he ran the team. He thought it was 50-50 with Sean. You run the offense, I run the defense. No, you run the defense, but you also do what I tell you. And that's where they butted heads, and that's why Greg sold him out against the Niners. You can't tell me he didn't anyway. But that's really where it stands with Dennis Allen. Do these last 3 games change? Do they overwrite the 13 games before them? No. Do these last 3 games show that none of the issues that plagued them those 13 games before were there? No. A lot of the same issues have popped up. They just happened to win those games. Some of it due to extenuating circumstances, being in a blizzard against the Browns, having this game against Gardner Minshew and having some great lucky breaks and capitalizing on them, and kudos to them. But these are extenuating circumstances. These are not just signs that Dennis Allen is now so much better. So after 16 games, no, Dennis Allen is not a good head coach for the Saints. No, he is not the future. Is it impossible for him to turn that around? No. Is it likely for him to turn that around? Also no. So what is the best option for the Saints for 2023? Cut Sean Payton a giant fucking check. Fire Dennis Allen, bring Sean back, hope that Sean brings Vic Fangio with him, and you still have something to build on here. If that's not the case, get the best offensive coordinator you possibly can. Get as much good young talent on this roster as you possibly can. Watch Dennis Allen wallow in mediocrity and underperform for 1 more year. Then give him Das Boot when you realize he's okay but not very good as a head coach. And be fine. Now there's the option 3, which is get lucky, find a quarterback of the future, find a guy who's able to elevate players around him, be in the playoffs, and DA can be one of the, he can be the Jeff Fisher type. Slightly above average coach who, if he's got great players, they can carry him, but when the going gets tough and when they're most needed, they fail to rise to the occasion because they're not really actually leaders. That's just not who and what he is. He doesn't take ownership the way that a leader does. And that's okay. Peter Principle. It's not that uncommon. He's a very good defensive coordinator. Let him be that somewhere else. But until and unless real substantive evidence outside of, but they play for him, is provided, no, it is not a reasonable opinion to believe that Dennis Allen is a coach on the rise or the answer for the Saints or a good option. Does that mean he's going to be the option they have? Almost definitely. But that doesn't make it the right decision. So after 16 games, that's where we're at. If you listened all the way through, I appreciate it very much. Always appreciate likes, comments in the comment section, whether you agree or disagree. Please share this with friends or family or anybody that you want to if you feel like it. And if you don't, hey, no biggie. Hope you enjoyed it, and you guys will hear more from me soon.